Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, zu Hause an den Bildschirmen und heute erstmals wieder hier im Giebelsaal des Hauses am Dom. Ich begrüße Sie sehr herzlich zum Abend Europa und die Medien, der im Kontext unserer alldonnerstäglichen Reihe Soiree am Dom stattfindet, aber auch in sich eine kleine Reihe bespielt. Ich freue mich, dass Simon Strauß, Dr. Simon Strauß, heute Abend hier ist, Redakteur bei der Frankfurter Allgemeinen Zeitung. Ich werde ihn gleich noch vorstellen, um in der Reihe Arbeit an Europa, die wir im März im tiefsten Lockdown mit einem Abend über Europa und die Werte rein digital begonnen haben, der heute sich mit den Medien beschäftigt und der das Thema Religion dann im Herbst bespielen wird. Also 3 große Themen, die Europa bestimmen. Und da wird auch deutlich, worum es geht, nämlich zu fragen, was ist Europa jenseits politischer Institutionen und des Wirtschaftsraums, wie kann es kulturell bestimmt werden. Das ist das Ziel der Jungen Denkinitiative Arbeit an Europa e.V., deren Vorstandsmitglied Dr. Simon Strauß ist, der uns dieses Programm ins Haus am Dom gebracht hat. Wir sind da sehr dankbar, diese entscheidenden Themen, die naturgemäß heute Abend in englischer Sprache thematisiert werden, hier im Haus am Dom diskutieren zu dürfen. Ich begrüße neben ihm Livia Gerster, auch sie bei der Frankfurter Allgemeinen Zeitung. Bevor aber Simon Strauß die Moderation übernimmt, stelle ich ihn kurz vor. Er war schon von Jugend an politisch, erinnerungspolitisch engagiert, hat Altertumswissenschaften studiert und dort an der Humboldt-Universität auch promoviert über Mommsen und Gelzer. Er ist mehr oder weniger direkt danach, nein, davor schon in die großen Fußstapfen von Gerhard Stadelmeier getreten. Jeder Leser, jede Leserin der FAZ weiß, wer Stadelmeier ist, und er füllt sie schon ziemlich gut aus, finde ich. Und zwar nicht nur im Sinne einer sehr soliden Theaterkritik, sondern auch im Sinne eines, ja, wie soll ich das nennen, Aktivismus darf man ja heute fast nicht mehr sagen. Jemand, der sich fürs Theater, für seine Wahrnehmung in der Gesellschaft, in der Zeitung, aber auch publizistisch einsetzt. Es gibt von ihm ein sehr schönes Büchlein mit, wie viel sind es, 30 vergessenen Stücken, die doch mal wieder gespielt werden sollten. Also jemand, der vom Fach sehr viel versteht und uns in dieser renommierten Zeitung auf dem Laufenden hält, der auch während des Lockdowns dafür einiges getan hat, dass die Kulturschaffenden, dass das Theater, die Schauspielerinnen und Schauspieler nicht in Vergessenheit geraten. Lieber Simon Strauß, ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie heute Abend mit uns über das Thema Medien sprechen. Herzlich willkommen nochmal, die Damen und Herren hier im Raum. Vielleicht nochmal zur Diskussion. Wir werden nachher alle hier im Raum einladen, Fragen zu stellen, sich am Gespräch zu beteiligen. Aber Sie haben auch wie immer, das nennt man Hybrid, Möglichkeit via YouTube-Chat sich an der Diskussion zu beteiligen und von Ihren heimischen Geräten aus hier Fragen zu stellen und zu diskutieren. Aber ich glaube, dass wir allein hier auf dem Podium schon sehr viel Potenzial haben. Hier ist halb Europa abgebildet und das will ich Ihnen jetzt auch nicht weiter vorenthalten. Lieber Herr Strauß, übernehmen Sie die Moderation.
Vielen Dank, Herr Weinken, für die freundliche Einladung. Vielen Dank, dass wir hier sein dürfen. And we switch to English now. Arbeit an Europa, Working on Europe, is an association founded in 2017, which fosters the young intellectual debate about the cultural Europe, organizes meetings, tries to get people in touch with each other, in different European countries. We have a website, we have a blog, and we also have a flagship project called European Archive of Voices, which is a memory project, one can say, where young intellectuals interview old intellectuals in all of their in basically all of the European countries, not just the EU countries, but the European countries. And the 4 panelists today all have an association, an affiliation to this association, Arbeit an Europa. 3 of them have conducted interviews for this archive, so are young interviewers. And Livia is also has been very present in meetings and the discussion rounds we organized. So I'm very, very pleased to introduce to you the different panelists. I start with Livia, who holds a bachelor in Arabic studies and a master in global history and Islamic science. Wrote a thesis and had researched on Lebanese refugees in West Berlin. Studied abroad in different countries, Israel, Lebanon, or Spain, and is a very, very dear colleague of mine in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, in the Sunday edition of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Is one of the sharpest and most inspiring young analysts of foreign and domestic politics, one can say. So we're very, very happy to have you here tonight. Anna Wallner, who we can't see right now, but she will join in a minute because she is still conducting an interview, is the chef of the debate section, the opinion section of Die Presse, an Austrian daily, and is also in charge of the podcast section there. And that's where she's working right now, really up to now. And so she will join in a minute, and we will see her very soon on this screen. Then I will jump to Hans-Erik in Copenhagen. So we have Anna sitting in Vienna, Copenhagen, represented by Hans-Erik Hafstein, who holds a BA in history from the University of Copenhagen, and is at the Danish daily newspaper Politiken in several positions. So he is a columnist there, but he's also editor of Politiken Historie, so a history magazine published by Politiken. And he also is a host at the podcast, a history podcast in this cosmos of Politiken. And so I'm very happy to have you here, not here present, but here on the screen, Hans-Erik. And last but not least, João Francisco Gomes, who is in Portugal, sits in Lisbon, and I'm very, very fond to have you here as well. He holds a degree in political science, a bachelor degree in journalism, and a master's degree in political science with a specialization in European studies. And so he also explored and analyzed the relationship between political power and journalists in the European context. So he's in some way our expert tonight. He has won, for example, a journalism award for his dealing with sexual abuse within the Catholic Church in Portugal. So in some ways, he could also be an interesting guest for our next discussion about religion. And he works now since 2017 at the national digital newspaper Observador, there at the Society desk covering religion, and is also writing a newsletter on climate change. So we have a broad, young journalistic analysts here, a broad range of analysts, and my role will be to connect the digital and the present sphere tonight. We are talking about Europe and the media. This is our theme. I don't think I need to explain a little. I don't have to explain in great detail why this theme is so urgent. We have a political discussion about the role of the media all over the place right now when we think about the question of the Eastern European countries, when we think about Hungary, when we think about Poland, even Slovenia, where the independence of the press is one of the key political argument points, the fighting points about the values of these countries. How do they look at the press? When we look about on the recent developments in Belarus, where a journalist was put down from a plane. So the political aspect of this question, Europe and media, is broadly seen. And today we want to look at this theme, Europe and the media, from different angles, really. We want to first, in the first round, there's Anna, just to say hello to you, Anna. I introduced you already, so welcome on the panel. and very, very happy to have you here. So the first round of debating question, I really would like to ask each one of you to give a broad overview about the landscape, the media landscape, because one of the problems, I think, what we have when we talk about media and Europe is that we really don't know enough about the media situation in our different countries. So before we get to argue and fight about the question, I think it would be good to have from your point of view, a short description of the media landscape in your home countries, or the countries you represent. And I would ask Livia to start to give this short description.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Simon, and nice to be here, even with a small audience and presence. Since we are talking in Germany, I think I don't have to go too much into details. You're all very aware of our landscape. But one thing that I think is not only true for Germany, but also for the whole of Europe, and I'm curious to hear if it's also the case for your countries, is that we say the media is the fourth power in our political system, controlling the rest of legislative, executive, judiciary. But I think you also have to add that in this era of social media, there is something like a fifth power, probably, if you see how every day people who are not journalists, but also not politicians, criticize and control us, journalists, but also the politicians. But coming back to the more traditional fourth power, which is the media, I think for Germany, and this is probably also the case in the rest of Europe, you have to differentiate between two types of media, which are the private media. For example, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, FAZ, which Simon and I both are working for, which is a big daily national paper, together with Süddeutsche Zeitung. Then you have Welt and Bild, but also on the weekly basis, Die Zeit, Der Spiegel, which is a magazine, and more outlets. And next to the private ones, you have the public service broadcasting, which is in Germany it was founded after the Second World War, following the example of the British BBC, in order to have TV channel and radio which are independent politically and economically as well, as they don't need commercials to survive. Each and every one of us pays a fee, a monthly fee, to finance the public broadcasting. And so, of course, if you're asking also about the tendency and the political leaning of these media for the big newspapers, you can say something about that like FAZ is close, more or less, to CDU, to the Christian Democrats, which of course doesn't mean that we have to report in a certain manner or write something that is determined from the top, not at all. There's a broad variety of opinions and perspectives, of course, but there's some sort of closeness, and you would say for Süddeutsche Zeitung it's maybe leaning more towards the liberal leftist spectrum. But concerning public TV, of course, their task is to be very neutral and to really direct their content to a broad audience. So there's also heated debates about how objective are they really, and is there a bias or not, but they have to try much harder than we do, for example, because of this difference.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. That was already very broad overview, and a couple of questions. We will come back later. I would now ask João maybe to describe a little bit the Portuguese landscape.
Of course, greetings everyone from this sunny but very pandemic Portugal right now. I'm really sad I can't be there in presence with you. I hope I can give a good contribution to this discussion. Thank you very much, Simon, for inviting me to speak here and to be part of this wonderful project. And greetings, everyone. Well, Livia was saying something that is very true. In Portugal, we also, and this is one of the first things I have learned in my degree in journalism in Lisbon University, the media is also seen as the fourth power in Portugal. And we also have a very similar media landscape as Germany, with private media and public funded media. And let me just give you a short description and we can discuss it after that, but probably you don't know that much about the media in Portugal. We have a few daily newspapers. Público is the most well-known, but Diário Notícias and Jornal de Notícias, which are basically three of the most important daily newspapers in the country. We have some relevant weekly papers, which are considered to be more to have a stronger voice in our political panorama. And we also have two important news magazines, which also probably give the most the strongest scrutiny to our political leaders in the country. And three private news televisions and one public broadcast service, which has been operating since the 50s, and it has been the first television channel in the country, which is also funded by a fee that is paid for by everyone in the country. Most recently, we also have been witnessing a surge in what I would call digital-only newspapers or digital-only outlets. I work for Observador, which is the main digital outlet in the country, and I should confess that sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between what is a news website and what is the website of a newspaper. And so that's an interesting conversation to discuss about digital media and what's the role of digital media in the country. And we have recently also launched a FM radio station. I think that is very important to say one thing about the media in Portugal, because I know this is not true in every country in the European Union and in Europe, but in Portugal we only have, or basically every major news outlet in the country is in Portuguese. We do not have any important national media written in English, for example. So from that point of view, what is written in broadcast in Portugal is usually not really accessible to people outside the country or outside the Portuguese-speaking world, as we could see. So regarding political leaning, which is something that we have to discuss here tonight, in Portugal there is a historical tendency, and this is obviously connected to the fact that until the 70s we were living under a dictatorship that was right-wing dictatorship. Most journalists and most newspapers are traditionally more left-leaning in the country. So most newspapers in Portugal try to keep this idea of objectivity, but it's easy to identify some political tendencies, and those political tendencies in the country are mainly left-leaning. More recently, and I would have to say that thanks to the newspaper I work for, which is Observador, which is traditionally right-leaning, we have been witnessing here in the country a tendency of having newspapers that are more politically leaning. So at least they assume more the political opinion that they try to share their vision of the world. But I need to say that this is truly seen in the country in the opinion or in the comment section. So there is in Portuguese media a really strict border between journalistic articles in the newspapers and opinion articles here, and it's really easy to identify that some newspapers are more left-leaning or more right-leaning by the opinion section, but not in the editorial, what we would call editorial or journalistic part of the newspapers. And there's one last thing I would like to add up to this, is that most media in the country are traditionally very, very pro-European, and sometimes really pro-European in a way that it's hard to scrutinize or to really scrutinize European politics and what happens at a European level, either in Brussels or in the other member states of the EU. So this is obviously related to the way we entered in the EU in the 80s as a way of really getting our democracy, our really young baby democracy, consolidated. And so traditionally we have been really pro-European, and this is reflected in our media.
Thank you very much, Joao, especially for this differentiation between the opinion and the journalistic parts, as you framed it in your media section, and also your reference to the distinction between the private and the public sector in this. And I would like to ask Anna now, because I know that, especially in Austria, our neighbor state, this distinction between the private and the public media sector is also a very highly debated question. So Anna, maybe you can give us a short insight in your view on the Austrian media landscape.
Yeah, hi Simon. I hope you can hear me well.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you for the invitation and that I can be part of this tonight. Yes, the Austrian way of media is in somehow a special thing, because we were I think the latest country in Europe that allowed private media, especially in TV, in 2003. So it's not only not even 20 years ago that that the first private TV station opened up in 2004, then after the law was invented. And also the public radios were just came to a living just in the middle of the 1990s. So therefore the ORF, the public broadcasting company, is still the biggest media company in Austria, and is dominating especially the broadcasting, the TV and radio market. When it comes to the print media, there it's a total different picture. We have compared to the size of our country, we just have 8 million citizens. We have quite a lot of newspapers, although some of them died the last couple of years, so there are fewer and fewer, but we still have around 14 daily newspapers in Austria. And the biggest one that you can compare to the German Bild-Zeitung is Die Kronenzeitung. And this is also still a very funny fact. If you compare the citizenship of Austria to the readers or the audience of the Kronenzeitung, it would still be the biggest newspaper in the world. So we are 8 million Austrians, and I think the newspaper has still more than 1.5 million readers each day. Especially the Sunday issue is very important. And when it comes to the ORF and the public broadcasting station, we can say that in the last 20 years, you can really see that the most important media department within the whole company. The company has about 5,000 employers. Is the Zeit im Bild, which is, and especially the Zeit im Bild 2, which is the big news. How do you say?
Tabloid.
At night at 10 p.m. And there you really have a lot of independent acting reporters and a very famous moderator. His name is Armin Wolf. And you can really see that these guys, they don't really listen to what the government or I don't know, or even the chancellor wants them to report or to air. But still there are sometimes strange news about the government that it tries to act or tries to have a hand on the things that happen in the ORF. So this year is an interesting year, because in August, the CEO of the company has to be elected, and it's always obviously also a political decision, because the management board is directed by all the parties, not only the parties that are in the government, all the parties that are in the parliament. So for the next couple of weeks, I'm sure that especially Germany you will read more pieces in newspapers about this election or this new CEO, whoever is going to be. Right now, there are discussions and of the first ideas that they want to appoint someone who is in favor of the government and especially of the party of Sebastian Kurz. So I think that's it in a short way. And also, if you look at maybe one sentence to the print media, you can say all the print media right now are leaning more to a pro-governmental way of seeing the things. Mm-hmm. But the funny thing about Austria is it depends who you ask. Yeah. So also I'm working for Die Presse. We are a liberal conservative newspaper. Maybe we would compare us a bit with the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. And it's very funny because we have readers that tell us every day that we are way too we shifted too much to the left and that we criticize Sebastian Kurz too much, who has recently a lot of not a very good face in the last couple of weeks and months. And then we have others who always put us very close to the government. And being someone who is part of this newspaper and has the inside view, I would say we are neither the one or the other thing. Yeah. So we try to be independent and objective and look at these things, but of course we have our liberal and more conservative way of seeing the things. Yeah. So we're not in favor of the social. So we would be more critical maybe to social democratic government, but right now I would say it's the time to be also very critical with Sebastian Kurz. And we can really see that it's always the questions who you ask. Some say, you're way too much, way too critical. And a lot of other people say that we're not, not too hard to him.
We will come back to this question, who you ask in this next round, because obviously what is objectivity? What does it mean to be objective? As you representing the media, I will ask you this question in a second. But now we will finish off with Hans-Erik to give us a short overview about the Danish situation.
Yes, guten Abend, and thank you for the invitation, Simon. You can hear me?
Perfect.
Perfect. I'm sad not to be in Frankfurt, but I guess this is the way it has to be. Well, concerning the media landscape in Denmark, where I live, there are some similarities concerning both Portugal, as I can hear, and Germany and Austria. But with an important difference, in my opinion, is that if you take the private sector of Danish media, many of the newspapers, I would say there are around 8 big daily newspapers and 1 weekly, which are important. Almost all of them date back from the 18th to the 19th century, so they have some very long tradition. And of course, these kind of private media outlets have developed a lot over the years. And that's on one side of the table. You have these private corporations or private newspapers, and then of course you have the public sector dominated by DR, Danmarks Radio, Radio of Denmark, and you have these discussions whether how much influence politicians should have on the public sector, and there's also this ongoing discussion concerning how much money should the private corporations receive in support from the Danish state. That is also an important debate right now. The Danish media, I would say, is in their attitude towards Europe positive, most of them, but when you see the coverage they make of foreign subjects, it's mostly always on Britain and the United States. And I think maybe because that's what many or most of the Danish readers are actually interested in, which in my opinion is a problem, because there's not at all enough coverage of, for instance, Germany, which is our most important neighbor. But they have a strong tendency to be, they go where the readers are, and that's also a problem, because right now Danish media landscape is in the midst of a digital transformation to these old newspapers. Politiken is from 1884. There's Berlingske Tidende, which is, I guess I would say, the Danish equivalent to Frankfurter Allgemeine. They are in the midst of a digital transformation to go from being only or predominantly being newspapers made out of paper and instead being online. And that is challenging for the ways that journalism is produced. And it is also changing a little bit the kind of journalism that comes out of it. The point about Danmarks Radio or Radio Denmark is it has always been criticized, especially by the right-wing establishment of Danish politics, for being far too much on the left. It's a standing joke that it's been said that 9 out of 10 Danish journalists would always vote to the left, which is of course a problem, because a lot of the media, a lot of the newspapers tend to, in my opinion, maybe to confirm one another's beliefs. So it is they don't have a problem selling subscriptions, but they have a problem concerning who they address in the population. So you have a clear tendency towards people living in the bigger cities subscribing to medias. And you can also see with our government, our current government, the social democratic one, our Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, almost only addresses the population through social media. She constantly wavers or refuses to enter in a classical interview. So we have this left-leaning part of journalism in Denmark, which is not really addressing a large part of the population. I don't know if that was...
Yeah, no, if I can jump in there right away, Hans-Erik, this is a perfect opening up for the question about objectivity. Famously, there are surveys surrounded and circulated by especially right-wing parties now, who tell that I don't know, like 80% of younger journalists, especially in the digital sphere, are also leaning to the left. I'm talking about Germany now. Is this a problem in your point of view, Livia?
I mean, I would say it's not ideal. Of course, if you would wish for a very broad variety of journalistic, political opinions amongst journalists. But two things. I mean, first of all, if you're a trained journalist, I think it doesn't matter too much. Your political priorities don't matter too much, because you know your business and you know your methods, and and you have journalistic standards. So and this, you see it also in the results of elections. I mean, we had now 16 years of Angela Merkel, CDU, with all of these journalists who are leading to the left. So they don't influence the German public in this way, obviously. So yeah, I would say it's not ideal, but it's also not a problem because you have so many controls, not only social media, but also us of the more conservative side, conservative newspaper controlling more leftist newspapers, and it will always be embarrassing for a journalist if he's not neutral, if he's not being objective, if he's not critical enough. So no one wants to have this complaint.
Anna, what is the role of the media? Is it to mirror political developments, or is it to shape political developments?
I would say both. From my point of view, it's both. But I would like to add something or say something to Livia when it comes to the German media landscape. I would like to ask you both, not only Livia, but also Simon, Do you really think that changed a lot? That mainstream media have in Germany have a more leftist shift? Because I mean, the Zeit or the Spiegel, for example, they are what they are since decades, isn't it? And the Süddeutsche. So I wonder. The first thing is I wonder if this debate is really. If it's really true on the one hand, and on the other hand, I would like to maybe say a very not a very popular opinion during conservative media that I'm also belonging to, is the question if this more conservative way of thinking, or also looking at the world, is maybe just in a crisis and has a problem to make it cool, to say it in very basic words. You know what I mean?
In some sense, the political developments in our countries are also mirrored in the way the media develop. No, when we talk about conservative newspapers we work for, this word conservative newspaper has changed over the last 30 years. You can probably, can point out from the commentaries which have been written 30 years ago and been named conservative towards today. There's a huge gap. So that's why I would say that there's always, an interaction between these two. But let's not stick too much towards the German or Austrian perspective. I would be very interested really to hear, for example, from Joao, how is the role of the journalist in general, depicted in the Portuguese public? Is there the saying that journalists are interfering too much into the political developments, that they want to shape and to bring too much their personal political opinions into the ground, or is it the opposite?
Well, if you stick to what the social media say, and actually this is one of the best ways to capture what our readers think of us. Yes, well, I would say that there's a lot of preoccupation within the readers of our political leanings, but that's that happens both with right-wing associated newspapers like the one I write for, or left-leaning newspapers. I would like to add something to what Livia was saying, because it's very interesting, and both Hans and what you, Simon, said also reflect in Portugal. Most journalists in the country, and this is I don't know, I don't have a number, a figure, a percentage, but this is a common sense idea in my profession in Portugal. Most journalists are left-leaning, and they would traditionally vote on left-leaning parties or left-wing parties in an election. Is this a problem? I'm not sure. I think it is a problem if you depend too much on the idea that the media should be objective, or should be independent, or should be politically. Obviously, we want media to be politically independent in order to better scrutinize political leaders. So if we are going to be the fourth power, if we are going to be the watchdogs, if we are going to be the ones who are looking what political leaders are doing and scrutinizing it, of course, we need to be politically independent, but then we are depending on something else. We are economically depending, of course, or dependent. And this can be a problem if you are covering the banks or companies or economical powers. So journalists and media will always depend on something, because we need our salaries, we need to earn money. And it's obviously a goal to depend only on the readers. We are far away from getting there, in my opinion. And so we are always going to be depending on something to give us money. So should we strive to be objective or independent? I think that we should strive to be rigorous, to be professional. We know our methods, we have our methods, and we need to be transparent with our readers. So I'm really anti using too much, and this happens a lot in political newspapers and political journalism in Portugal. And for example, that's something I would like to put on the table now for you, if you think this is an interesting question. But I witness a lot I write for the Society Desk, meaning I'm not really covering day-to-day politics in Portugal. But for what I read from my colleagues in various newspapers and TV and radio, there's a lot of anonymous sources and in political news, and this is something that is close, a source close to the president, a source close to the government. I think that the main way to avoid this criticism that you were talking about from the audience or from the public is to be transparent with the public. So if we have an information that shapes or mirrors, and this can happen both ways, the political discourse in Portugal, we should most of the times use identifiable sources in our news. And this really, in my opinion, this really helps us to be more credible within our readers, because if we start to depend, and this is a real problem, in my opinion, it's a real problem in journalism in Portugal. We write too much depending on anonymous sources. And this is the main way to shape the discourse of a newspaper in a politically way, is when we start to depend too much on anonymous sources that most of the times are a minister or a political leader directly. And this is a way of shaping the media speech that I think that journalists should be the one to fight more actively. So, but you were asking me if this is what is the role, how the role is depicted. Well, I work for a newspaper that is traditionally associated with the right-leaning parties, and I receive 8 mails every day from readers, sometimes regarding the same article or the same sentence. And if they are right-leaning, they will say that I'm selling myself to the left. If they are left-leaning, they would say that I'm mirroring the opinions of the editors of my newspaper. So as long as we are criticized by both sides, we are doing a good job.
You're doing the right thing, exactly. Yeah.
We're doing the right thing. Yes.
Yeah, that's for sure. Coming just very shortly to the question of the Hans-Erik, you mentioned the transformation to digital, the digital landscape, the digitalization of the media landscape. What are the biggest problems, in your opinion, for these questions we debated? Do you personally, do you feel a pressure of the more digitalized way of making newspaper today?
Well, I think there's one positive aspect which we should not forget. That's the fact that Danish newspapers, if you take the private sector, are now making far more money than it did 10 years ago, where the entire industry was very much in a crisis. But my personal fear, not shared by me alone, but a problem that goes along with the financial success is the fact that the Danish private newspapers are less, how should I say, disseminated through the population. I mean, they have fewer readers, but they make more money than 10 years ago. And that poses a problem because it could end up making the private newspapers irrelevant for political communication, for the ordinary population to use it as a tool for information. You know, it's not only news people are looking for in a newspaper, it's also a lot of other things like social things. And I think if in an effort to make a lot of money, if the media through digitalization, if the media then becomes more irrelevant to the normal inhabitant in Denmark, if that's the case, then we have a problem. So in making these very expensive subscriptions, which has been the solution, you're also cutting a lot of people loose from monitoring the debate. And I think that's a real problem, especially in Denmark, because we are not even 6 billion people. So it should not only be 10% of the population reading newspapers, it should be far more than that. And if you don't get out of that cycle, it can be a problem in the end, I believe.
Yeah, okay. But I was also, that's interesting, there's the financial aspect of this, but I'm also interested, Anna, you're leading in the section opinion, it's called opinion, Meinung. Do you have the feeling that the digitalization of our business, of media, pushes you in certain ways to bring out more and more opinion pieces in a certain direction? Or do you have the feeling that you react more towards what you see in the social media, for example, than you would obviously have been 10 years ago? You're muted still, Anna?
That's a hard question because I'm just doing this. I'm just in this section since 2 years, and I would. My first reaction would be when I'm honest, would be no, because, and I can explain it why. Because we have 2 pages each day, and we have a relatively big. Amount of people who write for us since years, the range, the opinion range is very broad. Of course, there are a couple of very conservative writers. Some of them are much more conservative or more right-wing than we are in the paper. And we have also some commentators who are coming from the far left. And this is kind of the my biggest or the main. It's like a corset where I stay in. And when I look at the digital on the digital page, it's not that I have actually it's quite a sad thing that I have the feeling that you have debates, of course, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and all the things, but this the format of an opinion piece is something that you don't write just between between 2 other things that you are doing while you are typing a tweet. So my biggest concern is that you don't find people under 30 or under 35 who have the time and also the joy of writing a proper, well-written piece for us. So, interesting. We're still to say this sentence once again that you probably also hear a lot right now is we are on this page. We have the problem that we are very white, male, and old. And so I don't have the feeling that my opinion page is really in a very big competition with the digital debates. But of course, that's also the reason why I'm doing it and why I'm in charge of the pages. I try to react on more than maybe that we did that maybe before. But I have to say sometimes I'm quite happy that I don't have to react on every, on every single little debate that is popping up.
Yeah. From time to time, one has the feeling that the people who complain about the strong opinions of the newspapers, they say they have only opinion pieces. They want to have the opinion for themselves, so they want to express opinions, and they want to have newspapers to discuss everything very objectively, whereas this has never been the case. So very interesting. Thank you very much so far. So we had a short overview about the landscapes of the different national medias, and we had a little discussion about independence of the press and the question of age, left-leaning. We all work for conservative newspapers, but we somehow are all young and therefore more left-leaning maybe, so that's an interesting ambivalence here maybe. So I would like to introduce a third topic now. Obviously we're talking about Europe and the media, so now I would like to ask you how we can integrate this European idea into our very nationalized media section. I know, Livia, that you are very, very, you have thought a lot about these questions in your studies, but also as a journalist, you yourself, you work for a German newspaper, you write in German, you write about other countries, that's true, but do you have the feeling that you do something in your work for the European idea, and if not, what could help you personally to integrate the European idea in your media work?
Definitely not enough, I would say. It's really a problem, I think, for me, but in the whole politics section, we're reporting so much about national politics. We're writing, you know, big profiles of German politicians, interviewing them. So you really get to know all the details, all the nuances. But for European politicians, this is not the case. We barely know them. We barely see them on TV. We rarely interview them or, yeah, I mean, profiles, not to speak even of. So I think this is a huge problem. One of the reasons for this is probably already in the structure. If you look at our newspaper, we have one correspondent in Brussels for the politics section. There's also two for economy, but still it's one man. And then for Berlin, for the capital, you have a whole office, like eight journalists only for us, for the politics section. So you see the preferences when you think Brussels is our European capital. You could also think of having an office there. But yeah, it's also every one of us who could do more there. But then you come very quickly to the problem of a lack of a European public, of European formats, European newspapers. Obviously, there are approaches. There are European newspapers. You have Politico Europe or the European or others. But I don't know anyone who reads them. So there's maybe also a lack of interest. But I think we could do much more. Have something like a European talk show, just really seeing European politicians talk to us and explaining themselves, because otherwise you will always have this trap that also, which is not only our fault, but also the fault of German politicians or national politicians, when there's a success, when Europe achieved something, you know, national politicians will always say, yeah, this was us, this was my work. But when something goes wrong, like now if you think of the campaign buying COVID vaccines, then of course Europe is the scapegoat for everything, and yeah, national ministers will also steal themselves out of responsibility.
But how, just to follow up, how would you imagine a European media outlet, for example? I mean, should that integrate then Hungarian commentaries on refugee questions also? How would you design this media outlet so that it represents European politics?
Yeah, good questions. I mean, of course, it would be great to have these controversial opinions as well. Now that we were talking about the European Cup in football and the stadium in the colors, rainbow colors, exactly. Of course, it would have been great to read something from the Hungarian perspective, not only talking about them and. But also hearing them themselves. But obviously it's difficult. I mean, also the language barrier is a huge problem. I mean, now we're having this discussion. It's okay, it's working, but I mean, it's also difficult. I would prefer to speak in German, and in TV, yeah, it's almost impossible probably. Even if you have maybe simultaneous translation, it will always be yeah, a bit hard to follow. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how would the ideal European outlet be, but I think we should at least try more.
Yeah, that's a good point. Hans-Erik, maybe from your perspective, maybe a step back. How is Europe? Is Europe a theme, a topic in the Danish press? I mean, you talked about the fixation of Great Britain and America. So how is the European idea integrated in the European press? That's the first question. And the second question is then, would you also dream a little bit about a European outlet, and how would you design it?
Well, the first question was concerning Europe and Danish media, right?
Yes.
Yes. The problem is that, I mean, I know that the editorial offices would really like to cover Europe more, but the problem is that the readers don't click on the articles that concerns German or, let's say, Portuguese politics. It's not something that is present in the minds of people, and it's Now, Livia says it's strange not to have a whole office covering Brussels, but people simply want to know more about Danish politics than they want to hear about European politics. First of all, it's far away. Second of all, there's always been a skepticism towards the European Union in Denmark. And I think simply it's a problem because of languages. It's not very popular among Danes to learn German or French, strangely enough. So there is, I think, a will among journalists to cover it, but the problem is that the readers are not that interested in it. And that brings me to the next question, what my ideal European media outlet would look like. I think it's possible to shape the public in a direction that would make European topics more interesting and appealing to them. For instance, I kind of like a newspaper or a magazine that covers, let's say, culture in all of Europe. I always have this feeling that when there is a discussion about who the next Nobel Prize winner should be in literature, if you take a German newspaper, they discuss who of the 5 candidates it might be. And in Denmark, it's always like we have to explain to the Danish public who this person is because no one knows it before they're going to win the Nobel Prize in literature. So I think it could help if things were actually presented in
continuity,
with a continuity to help explain that things are happening in Poland, in Germany, all around Europe. If that is put up on a level, maybe I think in my opinion it should be same articles in every European country, but translated into Italian, translated into to German, translated to Portuguese, so that you get a sense of reading the same thing as a person very far away from you. I think that's what's lacking, is that you don't have a feeling that you follow the same stories.
Yeah, I mean, you have this, no? We have articles exchanged between newspapers. You have, Le Monde working together with the Taz in Germany, or Novela Gazowska in Poland working together with Die Welt, and they reprint opinion pieces. But wouldn't be it interesting, an interesting thought, Joao, for example, if we think about the responsibility of the European Union for all of this? I mean, the European Union is our political representation system. And why is there not the idea of creating a European media outlet, financing it also with our money, our communal tax system, and especially focusing on the European politics in the different consequences for the countries? That's why I never understand why is not there the approach in the European Union to have this kind of a media outlet. Would you think this could be a way out, basically?
Two things on that. First, I think they are doing that at a national level. I can give a Portuguese example. As I was saying in the beginning of my first intervention, Portugal is a very pro-European country, and also our media is traditionally very pro-European. But there is obviously the same paradox that, or at least for us, is a paradox, but we have the same thing that both Livia and Hans were describing. Usually, the European affairs are really seen as a boring issue. Really, no one wants to read about Brussels, no one wants to read about the common agricultural policy, no one wants to read about something regarding politics in other countries. There are some ways, more recently in the last years in the Portuguese media, there are some ideas to try to bring European politics into our media. For example, my radio, Observador Radio, has a weekly politically show about the EU and Brussels affairs. For example, this is just an example. The main Portuguese newspaper, Público, has 2 podcasts on the issue. And what I was getting back to your question, RTP, which is the public broadcaster, started in the 50s, the first public television in the country, has 2 shows, two weekly shows about European Union. they are very interesting. They are not only focused on political issues, they are focused on cultural issues. Also, they reflect. They are what I would call a magazine for a European federation. If I was living in a country called Europe and not in Portugal, those would be the kind of television I would like to watch. And they have interviews with commissioners, but they also have interviews with artists and writers and people from all over Europe, and they tell stories. They tell an European story. They are very interesting, but they are funded by the Commission. These are programs that are funded by, I don't know the specifics, but they are funded by the European Commission or the representation of the European Commission in Portugal, and they are an effort by Brussels to put more Europe in Portuguese media. So I guess that at a national level this is being done. Why isn't this happening at an European level? Well, I believe, and you were asking this very interesting question of how would we imagine a European media outlet? Well, I think that we need to be pragmatic. The European Union is not a federation, is not a confederation. It's a group of countries. Most of the decision-making is still operated at the national level. It's the countries that decide. It's not the Commission that decides most things that happens in our lives, actually, in nowadays. So this means that first we really need a strong national press in every member state. And I'm not really sure at a political level what would be today the importance of a European outlet. I believe that the best way today to scrutinize Europe, to scrutinize Brussels, to scrutinize the commissioners, but also the governments, it's through national papers, because we cannot forget that if I want to ask some questions about how some decision is made at an European level, it's more valuable for me to ask different governments around Europe than to ask Brussels directly, because decisions are made by national governments. So I believe that we need to work in networks. So it's better.
Yeah. Can I just ask Livia right away if you agree with what he says? Because, I mean, he's talking about, he's arguing for more Europe in the national media. But can we not also argue that looking at, for example, Russia's influence on media stations, we are just talking about Russia today having a huge new trial to influence European opinion making by financing, a TV station. Luxembourg will give them the license. We'll have Russia today quite soon in our national. So, what Russia is doing, is it not more progressive, to ask a little bit provocatively, what they're doing to present and promote their values? Why shouldn't Europe act the same way?
I mean, a European channel would be great, but I think not in the style of Russia today, because I don't think they have to promote their values in an aggressive way. They have to correct myths maybe that Russia today is spreading about Europe, and have a counterweight there. But I think what a European channel should do, because before I was talking a lot about European politicians, but of course what is much more important are stories about European citizens and how decisions taken in Brussels on a European level affect us and our daily lives. And I think this is something that we don't have enough, and which a European channel could do. Also a European medium, but also us, of course, in our national media.
That sounds nice, but it doesn't sound very politically challenging for or promoting the European idea. I mean, to talk about the stories of the people and the culture background. This is what we are doing in our association, for example, Arbeit in Europa. But I'm really asking you as a political journalist, or maybe Anna, I can bring you in again. Will there not be a duty, in the face of the destruction, basically, of the European Union? We see so much attacks from within and from without. Don't we need a stronger, stricter pro-European media policy from the European Union? What do you think?
It's actually the thing that I was always, when I listened to you, I was thinking by myself, we are almost too late for such a media outlet, you know, because Europe is in such a bad situation right now after Brexit and all the things that are going on, and looking at Hungary. So I think it would be very important to have such a pro-European medium. But I would really say the big problem is how should it look like, and who is going to finance it? I mean, one model would be a thing like for example, the TV channel Arte is. Yeah, this Arte is a channel that just came to place because of a close cooperation between France and Germany, and or not only Germany, but I mean. And it's also Dreisat. I don't know if you know this channel, which is a channel that is concentrating on Germany, France, and Austria. But all these channels have always the problems that they are just for niches. No one really is interested in that. So I think what you should do, if I would, you know, if you would ask me, you asked the others before too, if you would ask me how a pro-European medium or a new European medium would look like, it should be something in a mixture between Politico and but not only Politico, because Politico has the big problem that it's just about European bureaucracy and about Brussels mainly, and what is going on behind the scenes in Brussels. But if you would put a little bit of Politico matching some CNN stuff, like you have a European CNN, but also I agree with Livia, some art, a bit of an artist style, where you also have a look on the habits and on the way of life and the culture in the different on all these in all the European countries. And what I would also really recommend is that it should not be a medium that is again concentrating on the big and important influence, the leaders of the EU, not only about Germany and France and Italy. I would like to read and listen or watch stories from the smaller countries in the north or in the east, and how their position is to whatever, you know, is the topic is right now. Yeah? So to summarize, I would say it's really, really urgent, and we need a medium like that. But I really see the problem: who is going to finance that? Who is, you know, really an advocate for such a project? Yeah.
But is it not interesting, Hans-Erik? I'm talking to you now because Denmark, especially in German media, has been, you know, on scrutiny lately for the change, for example, of the Social Democrats in your country becoming more right-leaning in the refugee policy to prevent the rise of the far right in your country. And the role of the media in this is obviously also interesting because, as you mentioned before, it's a shift maybe a little bit more to the conservative or right-wing politics there. But is it not interesting that the right-wing politics throughout Europe don't have a problem at all to use social media as their tool to, you know, present information and values, and that basically the European idealists, I want to call them like this, you know, they have the feeling that everything is too late. We just have to tell stories. I mean, we have to tell stories. We have to be very objective. I'm very interested in the question of how aggressive should we, as pro-Europeans, be to have more pro-European coverage. Basically, would you personally have a problem to work for an EU-financed tabloid, a EU-financed media company?
No, I don't think I would. But there is always going to be the question of, again, objectivity. Because even if you're pro-European, you should still be able to work yourself critically with European, with, you know, projects of the European Union. And there has been a very, like, a huge debate in Denmark over the last 2 years because There was a very popular radio station which was publicly financed, which was, extremely critical with everybody. The government, the opposition, everybody, and it simply ended up they did not receive a renewal of their contract, so it ended up the radio station ended up closed. And I mean, I would not have a problem working for a tabloid or a radio station financed by the EU, but I mean, if you have people in all of Europe, in Hungary, in Poland, in Denmark as well, that are so critical towards EU in itself, I think it might also be, how should I say, damaging to the project on its own accord. I think it would be a sounder initiative if it maybe came from as a private project, as a private media outlet built by private citizens themselves, rather than have EU sponsoring something of their own, because I think it might end up doing more harm than good in terms of when you speak of the European Union. So I would be a bit uneasy about the prospects for the longer term if EU was supposed to finance something like this. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's interesting. But whether I would argue in the way Livia said before, that a pro-European digital outlet would not necessarily mean that you only have pro-European or topics. It would just mean to integrate. You would have a commentary from a Hungarian commentator. You would have a story from an Italian commentator. You would have commentaries and opinions from different countries. That would be pro-European, because then you had an overview. So the last round of questions, then we open up to the audience. We talk now a lot about the European question. What is the responsibility of the media in relation to Europe? And we somehow came to two answers, I would say. That first, the national medias should talk a little bit more about Europe, but then secondly, also there's an urgency or responsibility of the European Union to think more about these questions, obviously, and that we as citizens, European citizens, should ask these questions to the European Union. So I would summarize our discussion so far that it's a lot about knowledge. So what Anna said as well, we just simply don't know enough what is going on in different European countries. We have a lot of knowledge about what is going on in America, for example, but we don't know that much what is going on in Slovenia right now, for example. So this is one of the first problems we have to tackle. The second question is our youth, basically, the question of age in journalism. So how is the question of objectivity combined with the question of age of journalists and political leaning? We touched on this. And the third question we talked about is financing. How do we finance the press in the future? And this is where I would like to have a closing round. The future of journalism, the future of media, how do you envisage it? When Livia, I start with you again. When you think about yourself, hopefully in 20 years, you will still be a journalist. What will have changed in the way the media operates? How would you imagine the change in 20 years from now on?
Well, first of all, of course, I think that we can still be journalists and our newspaper is still alive. But I do think so, because, I mean, when I became a journalist 5-6 years ago, everyone was asking, what do you want in this, dying brand? You don't have a future. And the past 10 years probably have been very tough, but I think now you see some success actually in this transition towards the digital sphere. We're not dying anymore. There's still, we don't sell enough online abonnements and all of this, but we do gain money from it. And there's, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years ago you spoke about this in German. We called it like gratis mentality. Like everything has to be for free with what is on the internet. And now it's very normal to pay for articles, to pay for content. So I think this is a good development. But you're talking about the content, actually, what it...
No, that was very interesting. Okay, I mean, just the future of your point. view on the future. And maybe I can follow up, ask Anna, I know that you personally are very engaged in the question of leadership, and especially female leadership in the media section. So what do you think will change in the next 10, 15 years in the media sector?
I'm not only engaged in the field of media leadership, female leadership, but also in the field of audio. So you would not be very surprised when I say that I think it's going to be a decade for audio journalism. I really believe that this is something good, because I think we can get new audiences who listen to our stories, and also in terms of the question how we can, communicate between countries and between different, also with language barriers, of course, but I think it's not such a difficult thing to make an English radio artish podcast show about European topics than to print it and to translate the individual articles. For example, you can, as we also see right now, and we also saw it last year through the pandemic, we can connect quite easier than it used to be via Zoom or other digital devices. So I think when I look at the future of media, I have always two sides in my heart. On the one thing, I'm very happy and I'm very positive, because I think there will always be interest for interesting stories. There will always be interest for this fourth power in states that points the finger on things that are not going well. But, and that's the sad and negative part, I am afraid that we will really get into a severe economic crisis as media companies, because also young people or people will not be willed to pay for it anymore on the one side, and all the other obvious reasons I don't have to list them now, because I think we are not discussing in the media economy right now, but the loss of other income for media companies. So I'm two-hearted, and on good days I'm more positive, and on bad days I'm saying like, oh God, we will all die.
Thank you. Hans-Erik, what do you think is the distinctive change in the next 10, 15 years in the media sector?
The one that has always been, and Anna was like kind of touching on it already, it's important that you make young people read newspapers, and I think the physical disappearance of newspapers is more important than one thinks at first, because when I was a child, it was a very physical thing with newspapers. It was everywhere. It was in on the streets and at work, and if you have everything on your phone, it's not a visual thing as it used to be earlier. So I think there's a major project of gaining the young readers. But again, they also spoke about this challenge in the 70s, that you had to persuade youngsters to read journalism or to subscribe to journalism. So I think the real danger or challenge right now is like the threats to freedom of speech that are both like physical threats, such as, I work in a media corporation house where it's like almost as a fortified building now, because the Muhammad cartoons was printed in a newspaper published by my organization, Jyllands-Posten. So there's this trend globally towards not being able to freely express what you feel. For instance, on Politiken's front page today, there's an open letter to the Chinese president as a critique towards their handling of this Hong Kong newspaper that was just closed recently. That's one aspect, and also with the debates that we see concerning Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, all that, there is a tendency towards shutting up one another, which I think is actually a far greater threat to journalism than whether or not we're going to gain the young readers or getting them to read. It's very important that the fact is stressed that you should always try to be objective, but also that you can also sometimes be critical towards your own. And I think that's a trend in the Danish media that I see right now, that everything has become very much entrenched. Like Politiken is a rather left-wing newspaper or center-left, but it like digs itself deeper in its own foxhole, and you see the right-wing newspapers are doing the same. And I think that's a problem, because the credibility of journalists are really taking a nosedive right now, and I think that's one of the consequences. And I think you have to be very on your toes to prevent this from making journalism irrelevant. Sorry for my long.
Thank you very much. That was a very important point in the end to point out the responsibility of all of us to be the place where debate happens, and that we are responsible to show how civilized debate is happening. So we don't leave the debate out in the social media only and then on the streets, but we try to integrate it. That's a very good point for the future. And now, Joao, you have the last word in this, the future of the media section from your point of view.
Well, in my opinion, and I'm obviously speaking from Portugal and from a Portuguese perspective, I think it will get worse before it gets better. We, at Observador, for example, we launched our premium program 2 years ago, and we have been witnessing a rise in number of subscribers at a pace that we had never imagined before. So I agree with what Livia says, that this culture of everything we see on the web is tendentially free. It's ending. So people are now willing to pay for things that they read on the web, and or they listen on the web, or they watch on the web. So this is a good sign for us. We are now, we do not spend money printing newspapers, but we spend money making good journalism, and people are now willing to pay for it. I would like just to add one last thing, because this is the part this first part is the part where I think what will happen is this, but I'm also hopeful that because I am very pro-European, as you know, and we have been discussing this a lot before, and I believe that Europe will grow and will be more united, and we will work towards a system that will bring us more close together. Not only the core countries in Central Europe that sometimes shape the discussion about Europe, but also more peripheral countries like Portugal, or like countries in the east or in the north. I believe that Europe will be more united, and this will need a really strong press scrutinizing, not necessarily promoting. I'm not sure that the role of the media is to promote European spirit, but to scrutinize the way politics operate in Europe. And I believe, and I'm really very hopeful, that we start seeing more networking in newspapers. I would say that every newspaper in every country in the European Union should have a lot of partner newspapers or brother newspapers around Europe. So if I'm investigating something about an issue that involves 3 or 4 member states, it's better for me to know journalists in other countries and to share information and resources between newspapers than to have an office in Brussels, in my opinion. So that's why I was before supporting more Europe in national papers and more cooperation between newspapers, and not necessarily European outlets promoting European spirit. Because we have Euro News, for example, which I believe there's a channel in Portugal, Channel 2 in Portugal, at some hours of the day it synchronizes with Euro News emission, and I'm pretty sure that nobody watches that. So I think that we need more cooperation. I'm hopeful that in 20 years, when I'm still a journalist, hopefully I will be cooperating more with my European colleagues, scrutinizing the way politics operate in Europe.
Thank you very much for this passionate clarification. Thank you very much, Joao. And now I think I give to Mr. Valentin, and he has a couple of questions for us, maybe.
Yes, thank you. Hello and good evening to Europe. There were many points for me. We have no discussion on YouTube. People are even today first times in cinema in Frankfurt and here in the Haus am Dom. So the discussion on YouTube doesn't grow. But I have several points, if you allow me. And I ask the people here in the room to think about their questions and contributions. First of all, I thank you, and for me it's very refreshing to listen to you young people being political, doing media, and talking about Europe, I guess, and my children, which are as old as you, and are the same. So we don't have to be so much afraid about future, I guess. Next point, where is Europe? I guess if I think about Europe, I think about Venice, I think about Austria, Vienna, I think about my coming holidays in northern France. So I guess it's a bit, we talked about it in February also, it's a bit complicated to grasp, to get in between your fingers Europe itself. Europe is a cluster of nations, and I guess there will be nations in 10 years or 20 years with their characteristic culture, history, how to eat, and so on. And I guess that's good. I don't want to live in a European culture. I want to go to Italy to learn more about Italian history, and so on. So what for me in this evening is important that we talk between Denmark and Austria and Germany and Portugal, and so get a small picture about what happens there and find out that there are many parallels. Talking about right-wing press, talking about Russia Today, we could also talk about Al Jazeera, we could talk about migrant media, which we maybe should do, because in Europe which is formed by migration, we're talking also about Turkish-speaking, Polish, Croatian, and so on speaking media in Germany, in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and so on. Then to the question of platforms. I don't know whether you know that Arte is planning a Mediathek with, I don't know, I guess 12 or 15 languages for the subtitles. So I guess that's an important step. All these questions about a European Facebook or European Google, I agree to Anna Wallner, we are too late for this. But why don't we use Facebook and Instagram as a European platform? It's possible. What about, I don't know whether you communicate your project Arbeit an Europa in the social media. You should, and I guess it's very easy to do it. Another point is I'm a little bit, I find it a little bit funny that we talk in English after the Brexit. I ask myself about language clusters. Anna Wallner talked about Dreisat, which is a TV station of German-speaking countries. We have Arte as a partnership of Germany and France. What about groups, small Europes, Scandinavian, Roman languages, German languages? Visegrad is already organized. We have already a subgroup of Europeans, and I guess we should talk more about these groups, which are also Europe. For me, who has been in several film juries, I was always impressed how easy it is for French, Italian, and Spanish people to understand each other because the languages are very near. So why don't we have more contact? And only in Malta, I guess, and Gibraltar, English is still spoken in Europe. So, last point, what about translation? I guess European media needs translation tools, and we are very near to it. There are very big steps made in the last time, and I guess if you talk about media, you have to talk about translation, because I speak English, but I have problems with a worldwide unicultural English-speaking culture. I'm not sure whether this is the helping instrument for Europe. So what about translation? What about language education? It goes down, as I know. Everybody speaks English, bad English. What about learning French, learning Danish, learning Italian in our schools? I guess we have to look for those bilateral and trilateral connections and have to make them strong. If I go to Prague, I go to Czechia and not to Europe. If I go to Venice, I go to Italy, and so on. And I guess we have to think Europe in these bilateral terms, and we have to work on instruments of translation. Thank you so much. Maybe you will say something to the issue migrant media, and to the question you talked about short about Russia Today. What about strong non-European media broadcast groups like Al Jazeera, like TRT Int, which influences every Turkish-speaking person in Europe? I guess this is a very strong factor also in our media landscape. Thank you.
Ja, oder genau, Sie können einfach eine Frage stellen oder ihr könnt eine Frage stellen und dann übersetzen. Yeah. So who wants to react to this? I found it the point on translation, if I may say so, is very, very important. Thank you very much for this, because I think that we really are looking towards a development with the help of AI, of translation apps, of translation communication technology. We are close to imagine a newspaper where all the contributors write in their own language, and then it will be translated by AI to the language where you're familiar with, which is obviously a great prospect, I think.
Simon, if you...
sorry.
There's something, for example, I think that we are not, today, for example, we're not speaking German because I don't understand German. Coming from a country where my language is not really understood Europe-wide, what I would say is that languages, and it's one of the. I agree what was just said, that I would not like to live in a Europe where everyone speaks one language and we decide that's English and that's full stop and that's okay. I think that the richest of languages, it's one of the most beautiful things of our Europe, and I love to learn some other foreign expressions when I visit other countries, but I would also like to say that what you were just saying is not that distance in the future. I read daily newspapers from all over Europe just by clicking on Translate and on my Google Chrome, and it uses Google Translate to give me edited version or in Portuguese or in English of virtually every language in Europe. So I think that this is today our generation doesn't have any trouble in reading websites in every language. So I think that we are paving the way to living in a shared, in a common digital space where languages are gradually not a barrier as they were before. And that's just, I would just like to say that this is more present than future, this part with translations, even though it's still rudimentary.
Further questions? Otherwise, we touch on the migration press question. So how could we integrate the question of migrant communities in our thinking? Do you have thoughts on this? Anna, for example, is this something you reflect on? You talked before on the white old men problem, but is there also a question of not enough migration views on your opinion page, and how would you change that?
not only on my opinion page, or maybe on the opinion page is not such a big problem, because you have migrants in high positions on universities, for example, or when they reach the point or level of being an expert in something. But the whole debate of migrants working in journalism is something that we realize, or that we discussed just recently, since the last, I would say, 1 or 2 years, because we can really see that there is a change, but and especially that's a good thing about the public broadcasting station, ORF, that you have a couple of migrants working there, but it's not enough, of course, you know. And then often these migrants are again people who are as I said before, who are well educated, experts in something, or come from very wealthy families and have had the opportunity to, you know, to follow a very educated path. So, of course, and that's not only the questions about migrants, and that's actually also something maybe I would say, put something or say a statement to get back to the beginning of our discussion. I think one of the things why also media, the classic, as we say, legacy media are in such a crisis, or not a crisis, but seem to be a bit lame, is that society changed, and especially social media is a good field or a place where everyone has a voice. You know, you have so many trends, like, I don't know, body positivity, and then you have body whatever, and the whole LGBT community and things like that. So it's not possible as a medium to cover all that, or to, you know, have someone in the editorial office who is a member of this. But I think it's also the reason why we are in a bit of a crisis is a bit of a hard word, but you know what I mean, is that we didn't react enough on this change of society on so many levels. And that's the reason why especially young people might not want to read us, because the topics that they are concerned of are not covered enough, or if they are covered in our, I don't know, Leben section in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung, or in the Entdecken resort in the Zeit, then it's always from a very, you know, point of view where people are old. I would say old. I'm also not young anymore. So like journalists in their end 30s or mid 40s, who are, you know, looking on a phenomenon and judging it, you know. So that's why I would say it's not only a problem with the migrants, but with a lot of different things that we are facing right now as a society.
Someone wants to add something? Hans, Erik, maybe? You're muted still?
I think there was a point about the social media thing, which I'm skeptical towards, because I have experienced on a number of occasions that, for instance, Facebook blocks content that we want to put out to the readers that follows us on social media. So I actually think it's quite important that the established media also at some point must take a stand against social media, and also to take itself seriously again, and actually to believe that it is possible to reach users, readers or listeners without going through the filter of social media. I think that's an important challenge also, to really decide whether that's a platform you want to use. Also, if we talk about languages, social media is very much in English through Facebook and Instagram. So I think it's dangerous to play ball, so to speak, with social media too much. Because
but I think I might not be wasn't maybe not very concrete about it. Maybe you got me wrong. I don't say that we should act like social media platforms, and I don't say that our content should be put on the social media. I think just the problem is that the social media, especially Instagram and TikTok, allow everyone, or gives everyone who wants, a voice. The migrant who is, I don't know, living in Austria since the first grade, and who, you know, tells me how hard it is to get a job after the pandemic, or the person who is, I don't know, the 14-year-old girl, whatever, you know, who is not sure about her sex, you know, and they can, in a very direct way, go out and, you know, the thing, obviously, with influencers and things like that, and be heard, you know. And I think compared to that, we are very, you know, slow and very, that's what I
Yeah, but that's a very interesting point to briefly say. Is it the role of the media to represent or to reflect social developments? No, and essentially what you're saying. I mean, is it our role to represent all the different sections now? I mean, identity politics is the biggest political or ideological wave now. How do we react on this? Is it not better to write about it in a way and not try to, fairly integrate all different groups? Even the migrant question is definitely a question, because you have so many different groups of them. Do you represent them in your board? Do you need to have them in your newspapers, or do you actually have the challenge to write about it? You know, and me personally, I would always say the role of the media should be to reflect and to try always again to think yourself in new worlds and to try to integrate worlds and not only persons.
But the question, just
sure
because
you want that, of course.
Anna Wallner mentioned it, the question is who makes media in the mainstream media? Yeah. And we are fighting at the German public broadcast institutions to get more persons of the different groups in the society into the media. Because writing about Turkey in Germany is different if a person with Turkish or Kurdish or Syrian sources is doing it, or writing about his community is different, or moderating a TV show. There he or she is a role model for other people who say, okay, I can also take my step into publicity. So I would say we have to talk about participation of my persons, and this is for me a European question, because having Italian journalists in Germany means to be more European in German media. Not to talk always about Turkey and Arabia.
Yeah. Okay, I think we are at the point where we can close and thank all of you. And if you, I looked, but I think the audience is still too impressed by all your very interesting contributions. So I think what really is necessary and what showed this evening is that we need to do this more often, and that we have to integrate in all of our thinking this European dimension. And if that is the only, the only result of this, then it's a very important one, to have more of these talks and to have more of these, network building, what Joao was talking about, that can help us in the ways we look at content. And so this is one of the duties of our younger generation, I would say, that with the digital possibilities we have, with the networks, the social networks we are all building at, that we not just use it to post photos of our cats, but to also have European thinking, intellectual European thinking at a new stage, basically. And this can be our big advantage in the future, especially what the political challenges we're facing at. So thank you very, very much, Anna, Livia, Joao, and Hans-Erik, for your time and your thoughts. And I hope we will continue these talks in a different way. Very, very much so in Rome. We will meet as an organization in Rome in September, hopefully all of us. Hopefully we will be able to have a discussion, to follow up on this discussion under the Roman sky in September. And here we will meet again later this year, maybe The exact date I don't have, but I'm sure that we will communicate it. And then we will talk about Europe and religion and the role religion plays in different countries.
This video will be permanent online, so they can.
Yeah, we can share this video to make it as a role model for the future events. So thank you very much, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.